Evening, Sam.
Evening, Jim. It's interesting coming in here and you've had the controversy over the week. you've had the comments in hot water this week, and it's not me.
Cut it out. You started the season in fine form. Yes, I am actually feeling myself in your spotlight at the moment. Let's get straight into it. Of course, it's been the biggest story over the last Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Let's call it 4.5 days. Really, when it broke and. Where it's pivoted to, the discussions around it, the drip feeding of information, different people are on the hot seat. Can I just say my bit and then you pick it apart?
You go for it, mate.
So what I have done, in my media platform is I just want to know answers to many, many questions that have popped up from this whole situation regarding Jake Kolodjasny and, of course, the concussion. I'm going to use the word waiver, but it was a document, whatever it may be. All right, I think we all can acknowledge it was a document. What has been happening in my point of view is the merging of two different conversations. Well, they're related, but we can have two separate conversations. And Geelong's issue for me is the avoidance of proper governance and process. So they've obviously spent a lot of time putting this together. Of course, Jake Kolodjasny goes to the concussion board. Strangely, they don't say yes or no, green or red. It comes back as an amber. And so they end up in this situation. So that's worth a discussion. How can we have a concussion panel who's there to make that decision, the tough decision, come back and go, no, not sure. So back to you. The issue for Geelong, as I said, is the hiding of the side deal, to circumnavigate his contract, which paints the picture of, I guess, the fact that you're not doing things on the up, all right? So most football fans go, hang on, if you had all these interests at heart, we'll get to that bit in a minute. You're trying to do things so you can help Jake, but then help the footy club. For very experienced, I guess, administrators, both Steve Hocking, everyone else involved, there was plenty of people in the room. Then it goes to the board with very, very experienced people, obviously in the medical, insurance, governance, all the expertise. And you had multiple opportunities after taking so long to get this, and it's only being revealed now. Like that's one discussion. The other part is the old conversation stopper, which is it's complex. That seems to be the
rubber stamp. It's complex.
It's complex. Let's stop talking. If it's so complex, we're paying lots of really good people and smart people down at AFL House and in the broader sport industry to work it out. And so complex, yes, for the legal minefield we sit in. It's complex for the doctors, of course. Remember, there is a case that potentially could be coming for the club doctors at the Geelong Footy Club. We've also got a class action. It's complex for managers. The manager wasn't involved in this. It's complex for players and the AFL. And I actually emphasise with that because it feels like we're a little bit bogged in this whole concussion debate. Like, how do we move forward and have an actual proper rational discussion, which firstly has the health and benefit of players, but also strikes the balance of football's a risky game, and that's what excites people. The fabric of our game versus the balance of the fabric of the game with the health and safety and well-being of players now and into the future, and also players coming in. So, I think there's multiple.
There's a lot happening.
Yeah, there's a lot happening, and I think people are all taking their post and standing at it and trying to fight this one to the death, but. Do you see how they're separate things?
I know, I'm with you on all of it. The discussion around the Geelong example, and again, we'll break it into pieces. The discussion around the Geelong example is, I can't cop that they didn't know that they needed to push that through to AFL or AFLPA. Yeah. Like in terms of the experience that's in Geelong's board and the experience within the football club.
Not a misstep. It's not a misstep.
So I'm not taking that excuse as we didn't know we had to do it. They knew they had to do it and then they chose not to do it. For whatever reason, I don't know if we'll find that out. I don't know if that'll ever come out or if the Geelong will have to explain why or anything, or the AFL will make them do that. But from that point of view, I find it staggering from the governance perspective of Geelong, of how they came to the rational decision of, hey, we're just going to make this deal on the side and not bring in manager, AFLPA or AFL, when this industry, everything goes through the AFL. Like, if you're a club, like you got to sign off, like,
especially
buying a pair of boots. You've got to. I got a suit from my club sponsor, and I had to put that through the soft cap because of how tightly they hold all these things. Like, to think that you don't have to go through the AFL for something of this magnitude, I find it really hard to believe that they can come to that decision. So it does lean yourself to that they were trying to hide it, and that's what it leans itself to. The other discussion you're talking about around the health and safety in players and then the game. So where this discussion lands and where the game is in terms of and bring grassroots into this in terms of mum and dad with little Johnny playing footy and trying to choose, do you play footy or play soccer? There's this really complex thing happening around the game at the moment of we're trying to make the game as safe as we can. We've probably got to a point where we realise we're doing everything we can and concussion's still going to be a live threat all the time in AFL footy unless you take contact out completely, which I don't think any footy fan or any player or anyone around the game is going to want that to happen. So now we're this situation that's come up with Jake Kolodjasny and the Geelong Footy Club is opening a discussion around waivers in contracts and what should be present within the standard playing contract. What rights should players have to sign up to in terms of the live risk so that the AFL can protect themselves from the class action.
And that's worth a sensible discussion.
And I think that's what this, I don't know where this will end up, the Geelong side of it with the punishments or whatever, but I think that the mature discussion off the back of this is, all right, well, what protections need to be around the game for both sides, for the player and for the AFL in terms of a legal responsibility?
100% spot on. Paul's given us a call. Good evening, Paul.
G'day, guys. Look, I think the whole thing's been blown out of all proportion. I mean, seriously, if you go to a car park, they have a disclaimer when you drive your car into the car park that no responsibility will be taken. You either drive your car into the car park or you don't park there. And I do feel sorry for the players that are going to get injured, but I'm not getting $1 million a year either to run around in the car. So I think they've got to put things back into perspective. You sign a disclaimer, you play the game at your own risk, and so be it. Yeah,
Paul, look, it hasn't. I'll disagree. It hasn't been blown out of context, and I think what you're debating there is what Sam and I are debating. We'll call that Part B for one, which is you understand the terms and conditions of what you sign up for. The issue, which has I guess blown up the context, is you cannot sign a contract outside of outside of your contract. I know I'm simplifying that, but there is standard playing contracts that you can't then sign a signed contract. That is just completely against the rules. It's in the CBA. Everything has to be ratified. And that's, again, why the question has been raised. Well, why wasn't the player manager present? And he would have gone, I don't think we can do this.
Yeah. And I think that's from all lines. I think there's the players manager would say, I don't think we can do this. The PA is going to go, you can't do that. And the AFL likely at the time would have said, you can't do that as well. So, yeah, there's reasons why these people and organisations haven't been included in doing this deal. Yeah, but
I get your other point regarding, do you accept the risk that's involved? And that's where we need to start having a more sensible discussion and not just shut everything down going, it's complex. First of all, Paul's, we've got another Paul on the line. Good evening, Paul.
G'day, mate. How you going?
Good, thank you.
Mate, I'm not a Cats supporter, but I do live down in that neck of the woods, and I've been a member of another club for basically 50 years. I agree with what you said a minute ago, or what one of you said a minute ago. They had to know of their responsibility to report to the AFL. They've had 3 major incidents of arrest of some of their players over the last dozen years, and it might have been more than 3. I'm thinking of 3 in particular, where illicit substances or drunken behaviour, etc., has been the problem.
Yep.
Now, they were admittedly right on all over that, and they knew straight away then that they had to report that sort of stuff straight back to the AFL, but all of a sudden they're getting someone who is possibly CTE affected to sign a contract.
Yeah, and this is where Geelong will be held to account. And I know Doc and I, and probably the smart comment came from Doc, by the way, so thanks for your call, Paul. But this is why Doc and I are talking about, they're one in the same, but they're 2 different discussions. Of course, Geelong will be punished regarding, call it the governance piece and the proper process, and that'll go all the way up to board level, and that's why Craig Drummond is under the pump as well, and Steve Hocking and others. But then, how can we move this conversation forward? And I think you touched on it there. Hopefully this is a start of where we're currently sitting at the moment. It feels like we're bogged.
We're stuck. Yeah. We're stuck between the AFL being terrified about what might come and I'm no legal expert, so I don't take my legal advice at all. But I was always under the impression that they didn't want to put this clause into that standard playing contract because then it admits to everyone before that, hey, there actually was a significant risk. And does that open you up to a bigger legal minefield that I'm not 100% aware of?
Well, you can't sign away your health and safety in Australia.
No, but there is a way because like UFC fighters, boxing fighters, I know different sports and I know one's a hell of a lot more brutal than AFL footy, but there is terms and conditions around contracts in these types of sports that have high risk that are signed, and whether they're fully legally binding, which is what I'm finding out. I'm learning more about law than I've ever learnt in the last week, but there is something that can be taken from other sports in terms of how that builds into a playing contract.
Luke has been waiting. Good evening, Luke.
G'day, Jimmy. Doc, how are you?
Great, Luke.
Okay, so my query is this. Now, we're making a lot of, noise about the fact that there was no lodgement. At the moment, it seems like the AFL is really pressing on the fact that there was no lodgement. However, if it wasn't lodged, then the player's safety wasn't really interrupted, was it?
How do you draw that bow?
Well, it's not legally binding.
No, it's not legally binding, but the fact is that you sat down and tried to sign a contract, which he'd be under a bit of trust, and the assumption that he'd have would be the fact that, well, I'm assuming all the risk. So can you see where we're going? Just because we found out it's not legally binding doesn't mean he wasn't under the impression it wasn't.
I do agree with that. However, there seems to be no grounding for it. That's what I find confusing.
Yeah, where Geelong's getting into trouble is the fact that all contracts have to be passed through to the AFL so they can ratify it. Even Doc gave just a very simple example of that. He picked himself up a nice bag of fruit, but that had to be ratified at AFL level. The fact that they didn't hand this on Geelong is where they're copping the big stick at the moment. And then also the other discussion we're having is how do we move forward regarding assuming the risk or taking on board the risk yourself. So when you try and push them together, I get where people think, oh, well, what's the big deal? Just this one, Geelong's mistake was not lodging the form. It was identical to a form lodged in 21 for the VFL player in the same circumstance. It almost certainly would have been approved. Makes no sense why Geelong would hide it other than tardy incompetence. Yeah, that's a great point. And that actually plays into why the AFL Players Association weren't involved in that one, because technically they weren't a registered AFL player at the time. And then as soon as that player reached the AFL, that document had to be torn up, if you will, because you come into the AFL CBA. And again, this is why Geelong has a little bit of an issue on its hands. Let's get back to the callers. Jeremy's been waiting. Good evening, Jeremy.
Hi, Jimmy. Hi, Doc. I'm a long-suffering Carlton supporter, Doc. So
no longer. You're not suffering at all.
We're not suffering at all at the moment.
To me tonight. Look, I think the issue is pretty cut and dried, black and white, along the lines that I think Doc was trying to point out earlier. The game has got to a stage where it's valuing the player's safety, particularly in respect of head injuries and concussion, as the number one paramount priority. Now, if that's the case, then all of the stakeholders of the AFL, the governing body of the game, should in fact be doing everything they can to not subvert that issue, but to actually reinforce and keep the faith with that issue. Now, it appears that one of the key clubs and one of the key stakeholders of that governing body has sought to deliberately attempt to pass on that liability for the player's safety to the player himself. I think it's cut and dried. I mean, we can argue the toss about the niceties and the finesse and the nuances, but this is a clear-cut example of the liability being attempted to be passed on to the poor player, who in his anxiety and desire to play is prepared to sign anything.
Pretty tip-top call there from Jeremy.
Jeremy.
You and I were nodding along. Pretty
I was thinking of something to say back, and I was like, well, he's hitting all of what we said on the head here.
Your clubhouse leader at the moment, Jeremy. David, good evening.
Good evening. I'm just wondering, with the way the guys attack the ball now, with the way the rules are about not bumping or are guys just more open now when they attack the ball and leaving themselves more open to those collisions and head knocks, even two players hitting heads together, whereas 20 years ago or 30 years ago, guys were taught to, you don't put your head over the ball, but you protect yourself with your backside and not run straight at it. The rules seem to have, guys don't want to bump because they don't want to obviously give away free kicks or get suspended. They certainly don't want to hit guys high, but they just seem to be so open now when they attack the ball.
It's a great point, David. It sounded like you're about to give a line that one of my old coaches used to give me all the time. Don't put your head where your backside belongs. And the amount of times that we train, turning your hip into the contest. But now, if you do that, you're likely to collect someone who's leading face first. I think it has shifted over the years, Doc. I'm a touch older than you, but it was a duty of care to yourself, which is that line, don't put your head where your backside belongs, look after yourself. But now it's shifted. You hear it every week at a tribunal. You have a duty of care to the opposite for your opponent. So that's been the big shift, David. Sebastian's been waiting. Good evening, Sebas.
G'day, Jimmy. I'd like to congratulate you on your professionalism. You're a Geelong ex-player and you're defending your club, but you've been very professional about the way you're going about it.
Appreciate it.
No worries, mate. Hey, it's more like now, the first caller was spot on. It's very hard to follow him up, but do you see any similarities between what's going to happen to Geelong now and what happened to Essendon 10 or so years ago with the drug scandal, or do you think this will just all blow over like a lot of my Geelong fan friends are saying it will?
Yes, I'll put this to you, Doc. There is a fair bit of angst towards Geelong, like the fact that they haven't been punished in the past. To answer your first question, I can't see it reaching the heights of Essendon in 2013 or reaching the sanctions that Essendon faced for those, incidents, if you will. Geelong, it looks like everyone that we speak to are going to just receive a hefty fine.
Yeah, and I think, I'll go with you on that. I don't think it's of the same magnitude of the Essendon scandal. The Essendon scandal brought in other governing bodies outside the game in terms of ASADA and WADA, and there was a lot more in the background around performance enhancing for the game and level playing field. This one's sitting in the kind of the backhouse legality world of AFL and club and concussion, and I'm probably the same. Everything that kind of we're hearing is it's going to be a really hefty fine, and whether that means that someone might lose their job or whatnot, we don't really know that right now. But in terms of the penalties on the club moving forward, I'd be staggered if they reached that far into the game.
Let's get to Roger. Good evening, Roger.
Hi, guys. Declare I'm a Cats fan, so put that on the table. I think I'll probably make a few points. One is I think there's a lot of people making big statements about things that they really don't know a lot about. I think the situation is very legal, and I think you could argue that it's not actually a contract; it's an agreement, like people make in when they play any sport or undertake any activity where there's risk. The second thing is I think that what it does shine a light on is the lack of leadership by the AFL in this concussion space, where you've got a player who's been given an amber light, not a green light, not a red light. They haven't been told by the AFL concussion panel they can't play. So it's back on the club to try and figure out a way through. Yeah, so I just put that on the table.
Yeah, it's a great point. Agreement or contract or whatever you want to call it. I just got to keep coming back to you can't sign any additional documents like that in regards to being a player at AFL. Everything's got to be a standardised CBA contract that goes through the AFL to be ticked off. That's the problem there. But your points around the lack of leadership and where to next, and can we have a big open discussion and move this space forward? That's what Doc and I are talking about as well. The fact that this could possibly, all right, let's move forward. How can we deal with the next Jake Kolodjasny or any other player that has concerns or there's long-term contracts? What can we do as an industry instead of having situations like this arise?
Well, and especially when
with the proper process, of course.
With our process at the moment, is it goes to an independent governance committee, basically the board that goes off and decides whether you can play. I was probably as surprised as anyone that Amber was even a marking on this. The absolve of, hey, it's not our problem, it's back on you guys to figure this out. It's either
Yes or no?
Yes,
that's why we're
you're
going
ready to go, or no, you're not. And that's what it's going to be. The fact that it can go back amber, for me, that's a concern in itself in a governance perspective. And I kind of had full trust in that board was the one that really knew, full of experts, knew exactly what they're doing. The fact that they can come to a conclusion that's inconclusive when we're sending them there for a conclusive reading, that's got some issues in itself.
Feel for Jake Colajasny. He's the one who's had this all played out in the public eye. Yeah, we agree with that, Nicole. All our thoughts are with Jake as well, but he wasn't. Well, he's the one who sort of came out and highlighted because he got sick of all the speculation. Again, full support for Jake, and no one has been critical of him in this situation. If anything, people feel for the situation that he's been put in. But at your last point as well, it was spot on. Bit of egg on the face for the AFL in this one. And I think a bit of egg on the face from AFL and Geelong, their initial 48 hours, I think they'd like to have back, Doc.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the attempt of trying to kind of push it aside and brush it under the carpet, I think wasn't very palatable on a lot of people in the game, whether that's media, fans, and alike. Their statement at the start showed that they didn't think that it was an issue at all, and now that it's kind of unraveling more and more and more, I think they're starting to understand the gravity of what's happened. And again, I'm not going to profess to know all the legal binding stuff in the background. I'm not that smart. But it's clearly pulled at a thread of something that's a bigger issue within the game.
Peter, good evening.
Guys, good evening. Jimmy, I was very harsh on Geelong, but for this time I'm going to be on Geelong team, not as much the coach. I believe the coach knew something. For him not to say that he did the arm's length is I think, BS. But to think that when Geelong played Sydney during that grand final and the Sydney team played that player that didn't have a groin, he lasted 30 seconds. And then for Geelong to rule out, was it Holmes that didn't play when he was cleared by the medical team to play? There's a double standards there, Jimmy. So when the coach says he's got no idea of what happens to his players, I don't take that for a second. Yeah, Sydney risked one player for him to be able to walk for the rest of his life. He lasted 30 seconds. Now, I think after that, he didn't play a game after that, did he? Was it Reid?
It was Reid, I'm pretty sure, with the groin injury. A little bit confused what point you're making there, Peter, and who was harsh on who and things like that. Maybe give us a call back and we might have another go at that one. But we've got another Peter waiting on the line. Good evening, Peter.
I hope that's me.
Yes. Hi, Pete.
It's definitely a popular name. Firstly, Jimmy, firstly, I wanted to congratulate you on the courage which few have shown in the industry to call it out for what it is. I'm talking about what's happening with Geelong. You know, I'm talking about your comments around the people who have managed or mismanaged this. So congratulations. I think it takes a lot of courage.
Thank you.
That's first. It talks a lot about who you are and why we listen to this show. And a couple of statements, right? One, I really agree with Lloydie. If the law stays as it is, we can't just pass the buck and the responsibility to the player, have these exclusion clauses, etc. Then effectively the clubs going forward, given the visibility, will be will go the path of protecting the players from themselves, basically because they also don't want to be implicated legally. So a question for you guys, going forward, can you see the evolution of the game going the way of, I guess, creating less impact or less physicality in the game in order to protect and sustain the good players in the game?
It's a great point you make there, Peter, and this is what Doc and I were touching on off the top. You know, we need to actually move forward and, you know, what do we want the game to look like? What does the spectator, the fan, the player, all the stakeholders involved, where is the balance?
Where's the line of what we're going to put? How much are we willing to take out of the game?
Safety versus risk.
Yeah.
People love the game because there's an element of risk. It's why people, love, boxing. They love, racing cars and motorbikes and all sorts of things. There's an element of risk to it that thrills them and excites them. But then there's the balance of, well, we're still got to look after everyone clearly, not only coming through, current and into the future.
Yeah, and this is that discussion we're talking around about where to from here. You can keep going and taking more and more contact out of the game and trying to protect the head as much as you can. The AFL's been down this route for basically feels like about last 8 to 10 years in terms of really trying to get it out of the game. At what point is it tipping over to then completely changing the game? I'm a believer of you're never going to be able to take out the full risk in AFL footy unless you take away what the game is. So then it sits on the argument of, okay, well, what can we do about it? What are the levers we can pull that legally we can pull from protecting AFL itself from lawsuits and protecting the players in terms of insurances. There's the argument of where you go from that. So is there an insurance company that's going to be able to come in and protect for concussion and go down that route? That's a potential because Zurich had backed out of their whole concussion claims. So there's that argument about it's just this moment is a really important moment for AFL footy about where's the game actually going with concussion.
Yeah, there were a few insurance companies a couple of years ago, but they walked away. Simon's been waiting. Good evening, Simon.
Good evening, Jim, Sam. Thanks for taking my call. Just want to change tack.
Yep, go for it.
This is a bit of a different call. You know that supposed club, first kick, first goal.
Yep.
Debutants.
Yep.
Well, I think Noah Howe's made his debut for Collingwood on Sunday. He's created a new club.
What's that?
First kick, and he didn't have his boot on.
That would be...
That'd
have to be one of one.
That'd be a unique club. I love that call.